Did you have any thoughts from the weekend that you didn't share leading up to it? Like, did anything change in your perspective, like actually watching the ceremony?
Well, I do think it's really cool that the Blue Jays brought back so many of Batista's
Yeah.
teammates and former managers and coaches. Like, I think that was
Yeah.
just a really well done part of the ceremony on their part because then it just adds to the whole experience. And you see Adam Lind, and I don't think anyone was sitting there saying that they absolutely had to see Adam Lind and Russell Martin, but it just adds kind of some depth
It was
to it.
awesome.
And yeah, I think it really was awesome. And you can see the appreciation that those players have. I think it adds to the emotion of the day for everyone involved. And
Hmm.
it was definitely an emotional ceremony, an emotional afternoon, as it should be, just given what Jose Bautista has meant to this team over the years. So I think that was really good, and it was nice to see that the fans were able to just show their support and show their love for Jose Bautista after all the moments that he's had in this city for this team.
Yeah, 2009 Marco Scudero was special, and that was nice to be reminded of when we saw him there. I went, man, that one Marco Scudero season, he was the man here. But it was interesting to see all those teammates that you do associate with him, and then all of a sudden Marco Scudero came out, and I was like, oh right, Bautista had friends before the team was really good. He's been here a
Yeah.
little while. I think that the Rogers Center, when it gets popping like that, and I know that every home, podcast, radio personality probably says this about their stadium or about their fans, but there's just a different level of heat that the Rogers Center can bring when it's a special night. And I was feeling that immensely, and I kind of wished I would have gone Saturday. I couldn't do it. I had a friend's housewarming party, so I was watching it on TV. But yeah, it just gets a different kind of loud in there. People seem to get it here. And I don't know if maybe it's a little bit of the inferiority complex still that the city will always have because it's the, lone Canadian franchise in the NBA and in Major League Baseball. But it's almost like when you're a Blue Jay or you're a Raptor, especially, that when there's that culmination of a career or there's that moment to celebrate someone's career, just, yeah, everything gets rolled out. The red carpet gets rolled out. The fans completely embrace it. They completely get it. And yeah, I think that was a large part of why Bautista was so emotional over the weekend was just the response from the crowd was incredible.
Oh yeah, you couldn't really ask for more as far as what the crowd offered. I do sort of wish, just as an aside, that the fans have been allowed to maybe organically chant his name a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's probably a side note, but there was no mistaking the amount of love that the fans had for Jose Bautista, and it makes sense, right? Like it's a while ago now. You think back to
Hmm.
2010, and of course, like you and I were watching those games probably basically as intensely as we watch the games now, but
Yep.
that is a long time ago.
I hate it.
And that it was a time where he was kind of the lone bright spot on that team in a lot of ways, where you look up and down the roster, it's like you got your John Buck and your Marco Scudero, like you said, and
Hmm.
then you got a guy hitting 54 bombs and doing it with a lot of style against some of the best teams in the American League at a time that the Blue Jays were really not in that category. So it was cool, and it definitely highlights the fact that this franchise has changed a lot since
Hmm.
then, and it's full stadiums, it's teams that are competing, and at the same time, they don't have anyone like Jose Bautista in their lineup, that's for sure.
Dude, he looked so good in that tight white shirt that he pulled off. That was so tight. And I went,
Eh,
man, all right, you can play. There's no way that you can't do a better job than Paul DeYoung today, right? Like, there's no way that he's not a better hitter in any reality to me. He could have stepped in and he'd be like, I haven't hit in 2 years. I would have gone, yeah, we're scratching DeYoung today. If there was just an extra DH spot, I absolutely would have done it on that one-day contract. And yeah,
and
sorry, go ahead.
and just to jump in there, yeah, like, as someone who covered Batista, that is the least surprising thing.
The
Like, that
tight
is
shirt?
that is the no, well, I mean, the attire is
Yeah.
secondary, but just the fact that he shows up in great shape is just it is the least surprising thing because this
Yeah.
is a guy who, after games, maybe he hits 2 home runs, out of those out of one of those seasons where he's going yard all the time.
Mhm.
After the game, you're waiting to get his comments and he's getting a workout in, he's getting his treatment in. And of course, at the time, you're kind of annoyed by it, right? Like, okay, I want to go home, I want to get my story done. But Batista was ruthless with the amount of
Mhm.
preparation he would do, and he would not rush his post game recovery work. He would get that done long before the Blue Jays had a formal high performance department. He took everything that he did so seriously with respect to his body because he knew that that could give him a little advantage or help him stay on the field a little bit more. So, when I see him out there, looking great,
Mhm.
there was zero surprise to me.
Well, yeah, and you heard that was one of the messages that you got from every single one of his teammates is the guy didn't let anything go. Everything was meticulous detail, and that was clearly with the body too, right? That was clearly with the way that he took care of himself as a player. And yeah, I just a chip on his shoulder guy from the very beginning, somebody who always felt like he had something to prove. And maybe there was just a little bit of that over the weekend where he got to let loose and just relax and accept what was actually happening for him. Because even when he was hitting those 54 bombs, right? That was the cool thing about Bautista was he was hitting all of them, and people around baseball were going like, how is this happening? Remember that? And it was,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
he's getting drug tested more than anybody else. And that was the narrative around him to start his career. It wasn't, wow, look at this incredible player. It was, how is he doing this? What is going on here? And it lasted that way for a little while. And now we don't think about it because, again, 2015, 2016 kind of just completely encapsulated his career, or stole so much of his career in terms of what we talk about with the player. But yeah, it was fun looking back. It was fun enjoying all those memories. And it was also kind of fun thinking about how I, and maybe this is like, now this is a good way of moving off it. So the Blue Jays are struggling, and great. They had an awesome offensive performance yesterday. I don't want to try to sound like negative Nancy here because that was a really awesome game. Everybody chipped in. Varsho has a big bomb. God, they needed it. God, they needed that win just in general. But I also thought over the weekend, just seeing the attendance of the crowd, and maybe one of the legacies of that Bautista team and one of his legacies from 2015-16. And I know right after they went into the toilet and they basically started to do the rebuild, but it's just, I don't think that the Blue Jays are ever going to be irrelevant like that again. Like I don't think that they're going to have stretches where they're just completely non-competitive, where the payroll dips down. That, to me, it just seems like this is the new era for Blue Jays fans is, maybe you're not going to be the Dodgers when it comes to payroll, right? But I can't envision a world where they're not just consistently competitive and trying to spend money and field competitive teams basically from here on out. Like that 22 years that they went without playoffs?
Yep.
I know
Yeah.
there's an extra wild card now, so that changes the math too, but I just, that's never going to happen again to this organization.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and yeah, two extra wild cards. The Yankees, definitely the worst the Yankees have been basically in my conscious lifetime. You
Dude,
think
it's
back and
amazing.
like, yeah, it's like my whole life. I just like look at the AL East standings and I'm used to the Yankees at the top. Like, it's
Mhm.
just not really a question. It's like, from Jeter all the way through to Judge, like you just have incredible, incredible teams. And now the Yankees aren't good anymore, and they're not about to be good soon. So that's always interesting. But yeah, to your point, I think that I agree with you. I think that the Red Sox, I think that the Cubs, these are more like the models for the Blue Jays, where
Mhm.
in their bad years, like this year for the Cubs is a bad year, but they still spend on Bellinger, and he goes out and hits 330, and then now they're actually having a bit of a good year and they're in the mix. Or the same could be said of the Red Sox, where this is kind of an in between year for them, but they still go out and get Justin Turner. They
Yep.
still go out and make sure that they're augmenting around Chris Sale and James Paxton because those guys might get hurt, but they bring up Bayo, they bring up their prospects, and they have enough veteran talent there that they're relevant. And I think that not every year is going to be a banner year for the Blue Jays. Of course, it's not for every team, but I think that, to your point, there are going to be just the elements of a competitive team and the resources to build
Mhm.
around it when things start going right.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see very many. What was it? It was 2019, right? When they won only 67 games. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just, those are the types of years that I wouldn't anticipate in abundance moving forward here with this organization. Okay, I got two lines of thought for you before we let you go, and one of them is touching on the guy that whose name you just mentioned, which is Cody Bellinger. And I started thinking, yesterday was an interesting one because Varsho hits the big, home run, drives in a bunch of runs, but Bellinger over the weekend was a killer, and he's been amazing the entire season. And I feel as though this one hasn't really been done before. But how serious do you think the what if window is on Bellinger? Because the Jays were obviously interested in him, looked into his services. He goes to the Cubs, but had they signed Bellinger, they don't do the Moreno Lourdes Gurriel trade. I don't think, anyways, with the Diamondbacks. Right? They're going to go out and get another lefty. They're going to have him play center field. I don't know. Maybe it's Pilar that doesn't happen. But do you view the Bellinger signing or the potential pursuit of him as a big Blue Jays what if, considering all the ripple effects that could have happened if he just signs on the dotted line with Toronto?
Yeah, they definitely had interest, and they were in talks. He's a Boris client. The Blue Jays have worked really well with Scott Boris in the last few years, and he signed. I remember because I think I was doing a radio hit on 590 at the time that I learned Bellinger signed. I think I was on
Mhm.
with Ennis, and that was at the winter meetings. Bellinger signed with the Cubs, but up until then, the Blue Jays had interest. And I think that if they had signed Bellinger on a 1 year make good deal, that's a great move. Then they probably still you know continue their conversations with Arizona about the catchers and about Dalton Varsho. I
Mhm.
don't think they signed Kevin Kiermaier.
Okay,
So
so that's
I
the
think
what if.
that's
That's the switch.
yeah.
Okay,
I
less
think
sexy.
that's Yes. So, I mean, Kiermaier's had a great year,
Yeah.
obviously. Bellinger's had an even better year. So I think that would probably be how things would have unfolded. But who knows? I mean, there could have been ripple effects that I'm not really seeing there.
No, well, that would have been the main one though, because all I could think of is how every time I watch this Blue Jays lineup, and everyone has the same thought. And again, this is weird to be talking about it this way a day after they ran up the score, and there's some optimism and an off day and blah 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 blah. But they're incomplete, right? They need that other bat. And it never felt like a lefty bat right now because that's the way the roster is configured, where it almost feels like there's too many of those guys now at this point. You wish they would have had a nice, like, strong right handed bat in the lineup. Ironic after all of these years of hoping that that was going to be the case. But yeah, I just couldn't help but think, man, if they would have gotten Bellinger and it wouldn't have been Varsho and they would have still had Moreno available to trade, they still would have had Lourdes Gurriel. How different is the roster? How different is the record? How different are we feeling about that team if that was the switch? But if it was Kiermaier, I don't know. I don't think it's all that different. Bellinger obviously would have been a great addition to this team, but yeah, it's hard for me to see the season unfolding that much or having the what if be all that interesting. Okay, next thing though, and that was to be tied in with the Bellinger thing. They redesign the ballpark and there's this power alley and there's gonna be all these home runs and it's gonna be amazing. And I mentioned I went on Friday night. I go to a lot of games, and boy, I can count on one hand the awesome offensive output games I've been to. Like, I was happy the Jays won on Sunday, and I was really thrilled watching them play. But I was also jealous of the fans who actually got to see runs at home, big innings at home, home runs at home. Because I've been to so many where there hasn't been that. And I had Jobo look it up today. They're 24th in baseball, Ben, at home at scoring runs. And I know
Wow.
like the runners in scoring position thing has been a real problem for this team all season long, but they jumped 3 spots yesterday. They went from 27th to 24th in Major League Baseball from that one game at home. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or theories like the park reconfiguration has anything to do with some of this, because it's not like they're not scoring runs on the road. They're doing that in abundance. What do you make of the home stuff?
I do think the park is a factor, and it'll take time for us to get a full grasp on this. But yeah, to my eye, it's playing in a way that favors pitchers so far. I mean, I think that's definitely the impression that we're left with. So I think that's a part of it. I think also this team offensively isn't great. I think it's a pretty solid team. I think it's probably better than it gets credit for
Hmm.
offensively. Um, but it's not great. It's not a great offensive team. And you think
Mm-mm.
about Bautista, you think about even the years where the Blue Jays had Marcus Semien hitting 40 bombs from second base, or even last year what they were able to do offensively. It's just not on that level,
Mm-mm.
in my opinion. Now their pitching's really improved. Their run prevention as a whole, thanks to guys like Kiermaier and Varsho, is definitely a lot better, and they can keep runs off the board. But I'm not waiting for it to click. I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, when are the Blue Jays going to put it all together?" I
No.
think that this is probably a team that's again, I'm not saying they're a bad offensive team, but I think they're probably more pretty good than they are great. And so I just don't think that lends itself to a lot of those really comfortable games like the one we saw yesterday where they put up 11 runs.
Yeah, and Bo, it feels so much worse without him there because now it just feels like whatever 7, 8, 9 you put together is just automatic outs. Like going from Bo to DeYoung is hard,
Yeah.
hard, hard to watch. What do you think the timeline is on Bo? Like, what's your impression there?
Well, they showed some footage, and I was off this weekend, but they
Yeah.
showed some footage on one of the broadcasts of Bichette. running the bases and doing some fielding drills. So that's really positive. I mean, obviously, there's some degree of comfort there for him to be out on the field doing that. Knowing Bichette a little bit, I think it's pretty clear that he's going to want to be out there as soon as he possibly can.
Mhm.
So the Jays have to be cautious here. I mean, if they can get through another 2 games without him, that would give Bo 4 more days here with the 2 off days on Monday and on Thursday before they hit the road to Cincinnati on Friday. So, that's I think it would certainly be tempting to give him 4 days by resting him 2 games.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I think you see how he responds. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the lineup, there's just no replacing a guy like Bichette. There really isn't, and he's so important to this team, especially at a time that guys like Vlad Jr.
I know.
Are just not George Springer. I know he's been hot lately, but you still look at the season numbers for George Springer and Vlad Jr., and they're really not where you would have expected. So Bichette, in that context, becomes even more important offensively.
Yeah, to me, it's just make sure he's back for next week against the Orioles. Like, that's the timeline for me. I'm going, all right,
Yeah.
yeah, the Phillies, the Reds. The Reds, especially lately, haven't been playing as well. Phillies going to be tough for sure. But, yeah, be back in time for Tuesday next week against the Orioles. And then, yeah, there's another off day in there, too. So, last one. Is this the rotation? Barring an injury, is this the rotation for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
mean, Ryu has done better than I thought he would,
Same.
to be honest, right? Like coming back from Tommy John and missing all that time, and then, you know, knowing that he's throwing 89, it's tough to get by in Major League Baseball with a fastball that's at that velocity level. But he's been able to do it. So give him credit. I mean, the other 4, I mean, they've been pretty tremendous, I think, all
Mhm.
season between Bassett, Barrios, Gosman, and Kikuchi. And the Manoah is a nice, at this point, probably more of a insurance policy to have at AAA when the rosters expand in September. I could certainly see him coming up and contributing to this team again in some form, or an injury could happen. But at this point, I see no reason not to continue rolling with Ryu. And again, with the 2 off days this week, it's really
Mhm.
not the time that you want to be rolling 6 starters. So
No.
I think you keep it to 5. You make sure you're getting Gosman and Barrios in there, pretty frequently, and you're not postponing their appearances unnecessarily. So I'd roll with this 5, and then you know if they do get to the playoffs and at this point they're a game and a half up, they should
Mhm.
they should be able to do that, but you never know. Then they're going to be in actually a really good position. And this is where, like, for as frustrating as this season has been, because it's been like a season where the Blue Jays, it seems, have fallen slightly short of expectations at every turn.
Mhm.
It still is a pretty good baseball team.
They're
And
pitching.
I'm not exactly, and pitching counts, and
Mhm.
like a lot of teams would envy the Blue Jays pitching, so that guarantees them nothing, right? Having a good pitching staff on paper offers them absolutely zero guarantees, but like I just wouldn't be surprised if this team actually makes it and does pretty well in the playoffs. So, it's a long road ahead. They have to get there first, but I'm going to be pretty interested to see what this pitching staff can do.
Yeah, I don't think you could have let Manoah play against the Phillies, given where you're at in the standings right now. And you mentioned the 2 off days, so it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer. And Ryu has looked so good. Like, if it's not for the belt error yesterday, it's conceivable Ryu doesn't give up any runs, which
Right.
would have been 2 games in a row. And I know that they would have been short, right? They would have been short appearances, but it did get me thinking. And this is how good he's looked. I went, all right, if I was doing the playoff roster tomorrow and I was doing like, hey, what's my order of confidence? Right now, shockingly, you have to put Gausman as number 1, but I would shockingly have Kikuchi at 2 because he's had, a month now of an ERA under 2, and he's just
Yeah.
looked nasty. And so that's just my position, which is crazy, but like looking at it from a year ago, but Kikuchi would be my number 2, and Barrios would be my 3. And I actually wondered if, there's going to be a scenario here where Ryu could jump Bassett. That's how good he's looked to me. And
Wow.
I know he won't. And I know that's a real long shot. That feels like, a hot take. I said I don't do, but man, he's looked like Ryu. And the thing I missed about him and watching him right now is, man, the composure element of Ryu. Like, things start to go wrong,
Yes.
and it does not matter. And I want
Yeah.
that for a guy in the playoffs. I know his one playoff experience with the Jays was a tough one in the Cy Young year, but he was hurt, and we all knew that wasn't the same guy at 100%. I know Bassett's kind of got that dog in him too. He's that kind of guy. But I love watching Ryu in those difficult moments, and the feeling I have of, I don't think he cares whatsoever. It was like Manoa last year. That's Ryu, just his whole career. So I'm
Yeah.
really interested in his stretch run, honestly. Like I really think it's going to be fascinating to watch him the last month here.
Yeah, I think to your point on Ryu's composure, like he is
Hmm.
remarkably composed. That was actually one of the first things I noticed about him in spring of 2020 before the pandemic hit. Watching him in spring training, it was like this guy is just so deliberate and
Hmm.
so composed, and I think it helps. So at this point, I would guess if the playoffs started tomorrow, probably not on the playoff roster. At least for the first round. But the other thing is, if you're trying to make it through 4 playoff rounds, who knows, right? Like, you're
Hmm.
gonna have different rosters each round, so, there could be room for a guy like him at some point.